It is a very great pleasure to introduce the speaker for the second Asian Environment Lecture. Dr. Marco Lambertini is to many people in the green movement a hero. He previously was head of BirdLife, and in that capacity he did some extraordinary things. He worked very closely with Indonesia and helped the Indonesian government to conserve a very large part of their forest in Harapan. So by conserving bird life, you have to conserve the natural habitat. And it's a wonderful way of conserving natural habitat to focus on birds. So your fans in Singapore, Marco, were very happy when we learned that in April this year, you will assume your current position as Director General of WWF. WWF is probably the world's most respected and influential green NGO. I've worked closely with Yolanda Kakabatsi for many, many years and admire her a great deal. And I want to also tell you that the CEO of WWF in Singapore, Elaine Tan, is doing a good job. Without further ado, I would say we look forward with great anticipation to your lecture on a very important topic, the green economy. Will Asia embrace it? Marco, please.
I don't know if you noticed, but not one, but two pretty boys. So that's. Yeah. Thank you. Excellent. Well, Professor Koh, Professor Lin, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm humbled and privileged to be today giving you this second Asian environmental lecture. Distinguished guests, friends from the NGO community in Singapore, many of you I know, and particularly all of you guys, I see many of you below 30, because we are going to talk about green economy, but you are going to run it. So all of you, welcome tonight. Thank you very much for making the time to come to this lecture. When I was asked about the title, I had many ideas in mind, but I thought to go for a simpler one, which is about the green economy, and particularly try to understand what it means and in an Asian context, what it takes to really embrace it. I'm going to start with a brief introduction on the state of the planet. We just launched our WWF Living Planet Report 2014. You may have heard about that, and you can actually refer to our website to download the document. I'm going to set the scene about Asia and then dive into green economy, what it means, the trends, the challenges, and some solutions stroke ideas, because I think green economy is still a concept in development very much. First of all, the basics. And the basics, and I know the audience is quite diverse, so I'm going to refer to some of the basic principles and concepts behind the green economy. The first one is that we are really completely nested into natural systems. Our life, our economy depends so much on nature. It depends on the services provided by nature, the air we breathe, the food we eat, the water we drink, but also the raw materials we use for our goods. And nature is not an abstract concept. Nature is something very tangible. Nature is about systems, and it's about systems that are made of billions of organisms spread across millions of species. These are the foundation of nature. These are the protagonists of nature. And when we talk about nature, ultimately, we talk about places that host ecosystems and ecosystems that host species. And the species that make ecosystem work, as I mentioned before, provide a huge array of services to us. Of course, they sustain life on Earth in the broader sense, but they're really producing all the critical elements that are really allowing us to prosper on the planet. And now, more than ever, we understand that. There's been, probably familiar, a fascinating report a few years ago that was really assessing the value, economic value of ecosystem services and biodiversity. And now I think we are in a position to understand very clearly the importance of these services. It's a major step forward because it has added to the nature conservation paradigm a completely new dimension. Before it was about spiritual, was about intrinsic value, was about scenic value, the way national parks were established years ago in the last century. And that was important and is still very important, but recently we have added a very important economic, utilitarian dimension. In fact, survival. Conservation of nature today is as much about nature as about us. This state of the planet. We have launched this report which is not for the faint-hearted, I'm afraid. If you love nature, this report is going to break your heart, and if you are worried about the planet, this report is going to make you even more concerned. But at the same time, is also presenting some interesting seeds for hope, which I'm going to try to highlight today. This is the way we call the era, the geological era we live today. It's a new word. We entered the Holocene about 12,000 years ago. Now we are into an era that is completely shaped and dominated by one species on the planet. Some extraordinary calculations that has been made recently, I presented to you here. This is the biomass of living things on the planet when the Holocene started 12,000 years ago and today. And the balance, the quantity of biomass between human-induced, meaning humans and the animals that we breed for our own consumption, and wildlife, has completely reverted. We started counting as 0.1% of the total global biomass. Today, the estimation that wildlife is only 3%. And nitrogen is in the air that we breathe, but is also captured by the by the plants on the planet and transformed into a reactive molecule that is then substantial to green growth. Well, today, human activities, particularly in terms of agriculture-related activities, are fixing more nitrogen than the whole green world, natural green world on the planet. So we are dominating systems and, as a consequence, producing a substantial impact. We have launched the report based on two main indexes. One is what we call the Living Planet Index. It's a measure of the state of wildlife as an indicator of sustainability. He collects information from about 10,000 populations monitored over time, spread across about 3,000 species, vertebrate species across the whole planet. And the result of this 2014 reports are staggering. That's what I meant by breaking your heart. The populations monitored, 10,000 over 3,000 species, show a decline, numerical decline, of 50% of individuals across this population, on average, globally. That means, in simple words, that in 40 years, we've lost half of the wildlife. And that fits with the figure that I presented before, with a massive decrease of wildlife biomass compared to a massive increase of human and domesticated animals. The decline is sharper in the tropics because impact in the tropics have been accelerating over the last 30 years dramatically, outsourced mainly by high-income economies in other latitudes of the world, and also because the tropics have an ecology much more fragile and susceptible to impact. And the Asia-Pacific, for similar reasons, because the growth and the development has accelerated very much in the last 20 years, 30 years in large areas of the continent, is showing a higher than average decline of wildlife as well. And fascinatingly, that's clearly represented by this other diagram, which is exactly the same, using the same data, but disaggregated in terms of high, medium, and low-income countries. And wildlife in the low-income countries in the world is declining much, much sharper. And in fact, in some of the high-income countries, is even recovering in some situations. But that's particularly due to the outsourced footprint and to the acceleration in business as usual development. The main drivers continue to be similar over the last couple of decades. It's habitat loss and degradation, main issue, and consumption, unsustainable consumption, hunting, fishing in an unsustainable manner. So this is about wildlife. This is an indicator, of course, on the impact. But then we have been working with our partner organization, Global Network Footprint, to identify a little bit more clearly the drivers, the pressures that are actually producing the decline of wildlife that we have witnessed. And the bottom line is very simple. We are continuing to erode our natural capital. We are reducing the biocapacity on the planet, and as a consequence of that, we are living in an ecological deficit. Ecological deficit that started already decades ago and continued to deepen. And today, the way we consume, it's equivalent to 1.5 planets per year in terms of resources that the planet can provide to us and regenerate. That means that we're cutting trees faster than they can grow. We are fishing fish faster than they can reproduce, and particularly, this is a major component of the footprint, we are emitting CO2 in the atmosphere faster than the natural system can absorb. In particular, 3 areas we are really overshooting dramatically. One is biodiversity. The impact on the natural system are producing a major biodiversity loss, more than 1,000 times faster than the normal extinction rate, plus, as I mentioned before, also in terms of actual population size. Nitrogen, as I mentioned, we are inputting into the system an enormous amount of nitrogen that naturally should stay in the air, and now is in our rivers, our seas, and in the ecological system and on the planet. And then climate change. We're already overshooting beyond the limit, and we know that continuing this way will head towards dangerous levels. So what are the pressures and the challenges that actually behind this particular ecological footprint? There is no hiding. The main driver is population growth. We took a couple of million years to reach the first billion of people on the planet, and since then we've been adding 1 billion every 10, 15 years, regularly. And we are still continuing to do so. And we are projected to do so at least until 2050, when potentially some models are beginning to indicate that actually the population will begin to stabilize, assuming that quality of life and some particular economic conditions spread in the least developed countries today. So this is problem number 1. Who is studying ecology here knows very well we're talking about population, carrying capacity of a habitat. This is we are overshooting the carrying capacity of the planet in terms of presence and number of people. That has been paralleled by a second major driver, which is the emission of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, but particularly carbon dioxide. Steadily growing, parallel to the industrial development in the last few years, and on the historic date of May 9, 2013, we reached the 400 ppm in the atmosphere. A concentration that was never reached before in human history, and that is beginning to signal that we are heading towards a 2-degree increase of temperature by the end of the century if we are not changing direction. And particularly is the highest concentration possibly revealed in the last million years. So, fossil fuel, we're burning fossil fuel, and we're burning other storage of carbon on the planet, particularly tropical forest and forest in other regions of the world. These are 2 major contributions to emission related to our economic development in different ways. And then we are producing and consuming food in a way that's also not sustainable. In many ways, many of the practices are wasting a lot of opportunities to actually support the natural system, and overshooting again in terms of key components like water, but particularly also raw materials. The oceans is no different story. This is the state of the fisheries, with the underfish stock being reduced over time, the bottom gray line, and the majority of the fish stock globally are either fully fished or overfished, and the trend continues to be worrying. Water has been identified one of the critical ecosystem services for our life and economy. It's been considered by the World Economic Forum, not by a bunch of ecologists, but by the world leading economists, as one of the top threats to our economic stability moving forward in the mid-century. And basically, this slide shows, these are dots that show the position of different countries related to the Human Development Index of the UN, which is basically an index that measures the quality of life and the state of the economy of different countries, versus the footprint that we calculated in the report. And as you can see, and this is where it's considered a kind of sustainable development quadrant, where human development is high, but footprint is low. This is where we should be, ideally. And this is the trend of the world. There's no country which is an exception, and of course, the high income, high developed, high human development index countries are at the top of the footprint, but the ones which are at the bottom are following a clear trajectory in that direction too. So we are still unable, we haven't found a way to decouple human development with ecological footprint. We seem to be trapped in a situation where, in order to improve our quality of life, we are destroying the very foundation of our quality of life at the same time. And so in the long term, this is a collision route towards a collapse of ecological systems and our own quality of life. There's going to be good news soon. Don't worry. I mean, you know, this is important stuff to know. But there will be not a fairy tale end, but definitely some hope. So Asia. Asia is a fascinating continent. It's a place that in the last 20 years has really reshaped the geopolitical order of the world. I think in a positive way, in terms of riding a massive wave of development, but at the same time embracing a massive challenge of innovation. And I think these two words, development and innovation, are going to be the key words that will bring at the end some positive messages to you. I don't need to talk about Asia to you. You know this very well, and all of you. But you know the high population and the urbanization. Of course, the rising income due to accelerated development over the last decades, the consumption that is growing as a consequence, and also the change into different lifestyles, high footprint lifestyles and diets. The rise in energy consumption, all the classic pattern of a very steep development curve. Today, Asia is consuming about 40% of the global energy and emitting about 40% of the global greenhouse gases as a consequence of massive, rapid development. In population growth, this is broadly speaking the picture, and this is broadly speaking what it's going to look like by the end of the century. So we're going to add 3 more billion people, by the mid-century, 3 billion more people to the planet, and Asia will probably see another billion added to what you have already today. And today, of course, you're dominating the world population statistics. Then we come into some interesting trends, which is the middle class. So the economic development has produced a massive growth in middle classes. Because of the population size of the continent, you are now beginning to dominate the middle class globally. And this is a consequence of the development that we talked about, but at the same time represent a fascinating opportunity. And the rapid development of the middle class, the rapid development of education in the continent and in many emerging economies in China is really beginning to trigger some interesting responses. We'll see in a minute. But basically, the majority of Asia, particularly the emerging economies, are, as I mentioned before, really heading to a trajectory of classic business as usual development with high footprint, particularly related to consumption, production, and CO2 emissions. This is Singapore, a high-income developed economy. Like most of the other economies in the world at this level, is far above the 1.5 average number of hertz that we are consuming every year. This is 4.1 for precision. And Indonesia, much less developed, but on a trajectory, is now reaching, has now already reached the point of break-even, below which, between the biocapacity of the country and the ecological footprint, so that from here on is beginning to actually encounter an ecological deficit as well. This is the Human Impact Index that assesses the presence of activities in Asia, the penetration of human activities in the Asia continent. As you can see, green is unspoiled, basically, and the rest turning red is intense presence, and shows the level of intervention. And looking at other issues like freshwater, some of the most important freshwater basins in the world under stress are in the continent. And then we're talking about green economy. And this is where, in an interesting way, Asia, with the recent development and the massive footprint connected to the development, is actually beginning to lead the way in many respects. The concept of green economy is still developing, but it's pretty simple in its foundation. It's really about, first of all, recognize the ecological limits in which we are living, and put that in practice in terms of behaviors, decisions, and utilization of innovation technology, and basically combine commitment on one hand and ingenuity on the other to really tackle this single issue, which is we have to begin to live within the boundaries of one planet. Of course, green economy is invoked by many. Many governments ask for plans, but it's not necessarily clear to everyone. And actually, we're still, I think, discovering what really makes a green economy work. And this has really been a relatively recent concept that is being developed. But we'll look into some details now. And first of all, we're not just talking about adopting a green economy. The most challenging part is transitioning from our economy to an economy which is based on different foundations. And that transition is the one where every economist involved in sustainable development today is looking at. How can we transition our economy from where we are today to where we want to be tomorrow? And what the transition means in terms of political willingness needed to support it, in terms of social system needed to absorb the inevitable disruption that will create, and economic stability that should be guaranteed and maintained during the transition. For WWF, our strategy that has evolved over time, we started, with fluffy pandas, and we ended up talking about green economy. I mean, this is a bit of an evolution, and it's a necessary evolution because we continue to focus on species and places, biodiversity and ecosystems, because these, as I mentioned before, are the foundation. But we have to understand, we have understood, and we are really moving the organization towards addressing the drivers and the pressures on this ecosystem, on the species. And so we're increasingly organizing our work around, yes, preserving the natural capital, absolutely critical, but also looking at the real key drivers that are actually driving the picture that I presented before. And these are difficult. These are difficult. Consumption and production, already quite complicated. It requires a very strong interface with the private business. It requires a very strong interface with the consumer world. It requires asking people to make choices, sacrifices sometimes, and taking bold action. But that's okay. I think we've seen some progress. We'll see in a minute more, and we're comfortable with that. Then we move into investment. And investment is a major driver of habitat loss, major. And we don't even see it. It's something that goes from computer to computer, from company boards and bank boards, or in every corner of the world, impacting multiple ways, different regions and countries. Is an invisible, powerful driver of habitat and unsustainable development. That's difficult, even more difficult than production and consumption, but critical. Then we go to the real difficult part, which is governance. Because investment, production, consumption are not operating in abstract, they are operating in a regulatory market and environment, and the governance, the good governance, from top to down, from local level to national to international, it's really the non-comfort zone where we're beginning to engage, but equally extremely important. The clean economy in Asia is to some extent a response to the, I think a response to the economic risk that is beginning to appear to the eyes of many investors, companies, and governments. Such a fast development has actually created such a strong imbalance in many regions of the continent that businesses and people on the ground and governments are beginning to realize that actually this is beginning to hit and affect productivity, social stability, and therefore economic stability too. And it's not strange that it is a response because we are responsive normally. Humans are responding to issues. We are not great in looking much forward. But the good thing is that because the development in Asia has been so accelerated, then the response is actually beginning to appear much, much faster than in other regions of the world. The first one, which is under discussion, of course, is the population growth. We have different scenarios, and these scenarios depend on our choices. And the choices we know are related particularly to a few key dimensions that will stabilize population. Just economic, equitable economic development, and eradication of poverty, and particularly women education in the least developed economies. This is proven, this is working, and this is where actually the new important debate globally is concentrating in terms of population growth control. Then urbanization. Urbanization is something extraordinary. We have, for the first time in human history, reached a point where more people live in cities than in rural environment. This is incredible, and is going to continue for some time, stabilize at some point, of course, but continue for some time. And this is actually creating a major opportunity. Yes, there are a lot of problems with big cities. There are a lot of issues related to footprint. There are a lot of issues related to disconnection of people with the natural environment. But there are also fantastic opportunity to have so many people together, being able to embrace a smart development plan. And the smart cities are really one of the major challenges, but also major opportunity to actually reduce global footprint substantially, because half of the population is actually concentrated in places where we can manage in a more controlled way system, production, consumption, etc. And the latest, I don't know if you noticed, the New York summit, the Ban Ki-moon summit in New York, one of the most exciting dimensions for me of that was this gathering of some of the mayors of the major cities around the world that have subscribed to a compact that will actually bind them to work towards developing sustainable cities, particularly from a carbon footprint point of view. And then sustainable production. I'm not going to comment this slide, but this is to show that there are a number of key commodities that we're actually producing today, driving the majority of the impact in terms of habitats and species loss. And this is where we need to concentrate in working on the supply chain, working with the consumers, working with the producers to make sure that we do produce these commodities efficiently, and we do produce these commodities with the lowest footprint possible, particularly in terms of land use, water use, and impact on natural ecosystems. There are a lot of traps on the way, and it's not going to be clearly an easy job. The resources are depleting, there is increasing competition, and competition doesn't help, because competition divides. And what we need today, the only thing we don't need today is division. What we need today is work together between sectors, government, business, civil society, and within countries. And unfortunately, the tension on water, particularly, which is the most striking one already in today's world, is actually moving in the opposite direction, creating more competition, more divisions, and that's really coupled with poor governance and limited social inclusion, meaning limited access of people to influence decisions. It's a major obstacle in the region, but also, of course, in other regions. So is Asia leading the green path? I think, of course, is a difficult question to answer, but Asia is showing some really interesting positive steps. First of all is the discussion at the governmental and private business level. And there are, Asia has got probably, actually, I'm sure, has got the highest number of plan and fora, discussion fora on green economy than any other continent. And that reflects also that response to a pressure that the continent and the economy in the continent is facing. But probably the most interesting and tangible contribution so far is the major development of renewables and green renewables energy. We have a truly green revolution in the continent. We have 3 countries already leading the world efforts in particularly solar and wind, China, India, and Japan. We have Indonesia discussing really serious and at-scale plans to actually utilize their amazing geothermal resources to move into a renewable agenda. And excitingly, even new banks like the BRIC banks or the China and some of the biggest sovereign funds as well are beginning to shift their attention from fossil fuels to renewables. And thanks to China, thanks to India, thanks to Japan, and thanks to the increase in utilization of solar panel, prices are falling. And that's beginning to create an avalanche effect that is going to make solar panels, particularly, and other renewables available more widely and more accessible. However, there is still a lot of development going on. And in parallel of this major investment in renewables, there's still a lot of coal being burned, and there is a lot of fossil fuel dependency. But I was saying before, green economy is about transitioning. And I think the signs that we're seeing from some leading economies in Asia in terms of attention towards the renewables is incredibly encouraging and is actually critical. And it is surely leading the way globally. And then a few ideas on green economy in Asia. So the first one is, so how to make it happen. The first one is definitely concentrate very heavily on renewables. This is unescapable. We have to move out of fossil fuel. Oil companies have to understand they will have to close shop soon. This is what happened to Kodak when digital photography happens. This is happening to them. And they need to understand that they have to begin to transition to renewables because their wave of innovation will hit them very soon. And of course, if we can convince the oil companies to begin to invest and redirect, there will be a massive shift of resources. $1 trillion is given every year to subsidies to fossil fuel consumption, exploration, and extraction by governments. And $1.5 trillion is put into the same sector by private investors. Now imagine if that contribution, those subsidies, will be shifted towards renewables. This is happening already to some extent, and gradually. We need to accelerate, and we need to really be clear about this as being the top priority, not just for climate change, but in terms of reshaping completely the production system of our economy. Sustainable cities, I mentioned before, great opportunity to really increase efficiency, particularly in terms of low carbon development in major metropolis around the world, and also work on consumption, addressing the consumers in these cities. Inter-regional trade, this is expanding globally, we're all interconnected. Regionally, in Asia particularly, there are huge discussions, as you know, about further liberalizing the trade and encouraging trade, which in itself is not a big deal, perhaps, but has to be really inspired by low carbon and green approaches. And this is obviously another important direction. And then the financial input. So the financial inputs needs to be really follow these principles. I mentioned the subsidies, I mentioned the private investment. Everybody, even us, in our private life, with our little savings, we need to begin to question the classic paradigm of investment return. And we need to challenge our investment manager and ask to invest in sources which are green, in activities which are green. And actually, the data show that return is almost equivalent to the one in a more classic investment portfolio. So there is a huge opportunity here to lead the way in our single lives, as well as, of course, influencing the major investors, which are pension funds, sovereign funds, the major hedge funds based in the most developed economies, and of course, government and bank, development banks' resources. This is happening very slowly. You may have heard the major debate in New York again about divestment for fossil fuels. Foundations like Rockefeller, with $3 billion, if I'm not mistaken, of a size like that, investment fund, they have decided for the first time to divest from fossil fuels publicly. And many others have made similar commitments. We, WWF, are running a similar campaign. This is a critical direction. Finance needs to follow a green economy in terms of supporting it through investment. And then more logical and common things, but still very important, is the importance of an integrated policy approach, particularly at the government level. And I would like to say this. I think we have seen, again, New York summit has been really a fantastic demonstration of where we are today. We've seen civil society taking the street. We've seen 500,000 people in New York and probably 5 million all over the world taking the street, asking for shifting out, moving out, and phasing out quickly our carbon-dependent economy. We've seen businesses like, including some really complicated businesses, and we've seen even palm oil, large conglomerate palm oil companies, and pulp and paper companies, making commitment to zero deforestation in a very short period of time, making bold commitment for reducing CO2 emissions. We've seen all that from the civil society at the business level. We haven't seen yet that leadership at the government level. And I think this is when this integrated policy intervention, where governments need to begin to connect and get their act together across departments within the government, but more importantly, needs to really abandon this idea of a nation-state approach to global challenges. A global challenge cannot be addressed by country positioning. I know, this is the way we work. We're tribal, we look at our own community as the center of the universe. This is in our genes, in our DNA. But we have to really understand that in order to face a global challenge, we have to come together. And I will dream of the day when a UNFCCC final negotiation, high-level segment, would have head of states of the government around the table and no name of countries in front of them. Because they have to sit at the table and think globally, because otherwise we're not getting out of this. Good news is the government and this is their job, and it's a difficult job, need to balance different pressures. And so it is actually up to us as civil society, and up to the business to really encourage and exert pressure on the government to really make that shift, psychological and practical. Singapore specifically is also an interesting example. Of course, your situation is very specific. I mean, you are an island state, you have very limited land. You've done a lot of things in terms of maintaining a balance with the natural environment. You keep nature very close to you in the city and outside. And the awareness at the population level has grown dramatically. There is no doubt about that over the time. And your green plan is really ambitious. And I was particularly excited by hearing that recently the government has actually embraced a solar power plan for the city. And that's really important, because no matter what the impact of the country, let's say in objective terms, is globally, I think the signals that you're sending by developing a green economy type of direction in the country is very important. But I have to say that despite you being a small population in a small piece of land, you have two critical contributions that I think are very significant at an Asian and global level. The first one, of course, is consumption and production. You are a high level income country with high level of consumption. And I think consumption is critical in the bigger picture, as we've seen, and your contribution can be substantial, particularly at an Asian level. The second dimension, which is more important, is that you are a major investment hub. And talking about the challenge of shifting investment towards a green direction, this is where you, with your banks, with your sovereign fund, with your influence over the markets, can really make a huge difference. This is probably the single most critical contribution that Singapore could make to green economy globally. And I'm heading towards the end with a couple of considerations as well. So there are also some, I'm afraid, deep obstacles in achieving this set of ideas, this shifting towards a green economy. The first one is we continue to look at nature with ambivalence. Despite being a dominant species, we continue to look at nature with a mix of attraction, because we've been living in nature 99.99% of our natural history. We've been embedded in nature. We need nature. We take plants in our apartments. We take cats or dogs as a surrogate of wildlife to stroke when we have a bit of a bad day. We need nature. But on the other hand, we also continue to see nature as dangerous, as an enemy, as something to conquer, despite being so dominant today. We have to win over this complex. We have to really embrace a concept of harmony with nature that is still not there, particularly in our instinctive reaction. We have to also come to terms with the fact that we are not living in a limitless planet. Oh no, everybody knows it intellectually, or many do, but the majority don't really feel it. And we don't behave every day like if we had a one planet with clear limits. It's like if you have in your pocket $20 and you enter a restaurant that you know will cost you a bill of $500. We don't do that. But we do that when we actually decide how to exploit the resources of the planet, because we know that the planet is limited, but we go in with an approach as if it was unlimited. Then we are a reactive species, and that's again in our genes. We are an animal species that has evolved, like most of the animals, to respond to stimulations. We look, this is the way we gather, this is the way we hunt, and we look at the problem and then we respond. We need to see in order to be able to do something. And actually, this is probably what gives me more hope than anything else, because we are beginning to see it. And we are beginning, more importantly, to feel it. We're beginning to feel environmental degradation on our skin, because the sun is hotter than before. We're going to feel it in our hearts because people are dying of extreme weather events triggered by climate change. And we're going to begin to feel it in our pocket as well, particularly governments, because the cost inflicted by environmental degradation and climate change are already substantial and will continue to grow. So as that, we're beginning to respond. And so it's true, the message I presented before, we are reaching a tipping point in terms of capacity of the planet to absorb our pressure. But we're also reaching, I feel very strongly, a triggering point, which is actually the point in which our species is beginning to respond. And we've seen that. The state of the planet is going worse, the pressure is going up, but the response is increasing very fast. And I think that's really where the major promising seed of hope is. And then, as I said before, we're tribal. So this is a bit of an anthropologic view of conservation, but I think really we're also very tribal in our genes. We tend to be, family, then friends, and then of course countries. We have to look at one planet, one challenge, one tribe, because if we don't, we're not going to be able to put in place the coordination, the cohesion, the common cause, and the common purpose that we need to face the challenges today. And one example of this, I think, is the way we treat our oceans. We look at the oceans with fear. We look at the ecosystems of the oceans with something that is dangerous to us, because it is a mighty force of nature. We look at it as bottomless, and we look at it as something infinite. We look at the horizon in the open sea, and it seems that the oceans will go on forever. Now, I'm going to show you a picture that I think and I hope will stick in your mind, because this is something that definitely impressed me when the US Geological Survey showed me this image. So imagine all the oceans of the world put together in terms of volume of water, and imagine to compare it with the volume of Earth. Make the exercise in your mind. How the two would compare, a ball of blue and the ball of Earth without water. That's how it looks. This is how the ocean altogether compared to the landmass of the whole globe of Earth. So this is just to make a simple point. Ecosystems and nature are, yes, resilient, but they're also very fragile. And compared to the pressure that we're putting on today on the natural systems, we have to really begin to accept the fact that the future of the planet, to many extent, is in our hands. But let's not be fooled, because the planet will go on, and nature will go on. It's us that actually are more in danger of suffering serious consequences. And I think these two dimensions, understanding that there is an opportunity to continue to live in and build a prosperous future for ourselves, and there is an opportunity to develop a path that actually it is within the one planet limits. And because we're feeling that by not doing that, we are suffering consequences, we are beginning to feel it directly, I think these two components are going to be really the triggers of a change dramatically. And sorry, I wanted to mention this because I was at the, I wasn't actually, I missed it and was so devastated because I love seafood. But you had this wonderful idea of a sustainable seafood festival, WWF and other organizations here in Singapore. And as you know, consumption can be changed. We have been pleading for the issue of the shark depletion for many years, and now we're beginning to see a change. We're beginning to see drastic change in many areas of our consumption. It can be done, and there's so many examples around the world, locally, regionally, nationally, that actually demonstrate that consumption can change, sustainable production can be put in place, and I'll be happy to talk more about this during the question and answer session. Basically, this is the option. Either we continue to move up in consuming more resources, or we stabilize at one planet. It's as simple as that. Of course, it's not simple, but the principle is very simple. We have one planet, and we have to make the most of it, preserving its natural capital. And I found this on the newspaper coming from, this is a dating agency that is using a panda as a lonely kind of, are you lonely? Dial the dating agency, you'll find a mate. That's the message. Well, the message for me was more, we cannot do this together. We cannot do this in isolation. And actually, I'm being provocative here by saying, even WWF, the panda here, cannot do it alone. We have to build partnership, and I think my vision for the organization is really, because of our brand, because of our penetration and access, is to really become more of a catalyst for the private sector, the government, and the civil society to come together and really work on sustainable solutions, because we have to work together, and this is the critical to do. And of course, we can work together. Now, I'm not sure what what kind of person was the one who gave the macaque a mobile. I think he probably lost it in a Japanese onsen, and the macaque found it afterwards. But this was actually the winner of the wildlife photography competition this year in London. And it's extraordinary, isn't it? I think he's probably dialing somebody. But this is to say that actually coming together is now easier and more exciting than ever because of the digital space that we have created. And as WWF, we are super excited by the ambition of building a movement for nature and people of 100, 200, 500, 1 billion people that actually can come together and begin to exert together the pressure and that support that I think we need to move forward. And at the end, I'm not sure if this works, but I love this clip. No, it doesn't work. Technical support. You can try click on the top. Okay, well, I explained to you. This was a lovely clip, video clip, that was showing how we are all connected. It was comparing human and wildlife dimensions. It's called We Are All Connected. It's a video clip of WWF. And I wanted to end with a very romantic note, which obviously I'm not allowed to do, but doesn't matter. But this is, I invite you to look into YouTube, because we have on the YouTube the same clip. And basically it's saying we're all connected, we're all in this, and working together is going to be the only option. But yes, the situation is very grave, very serious, but as I said, I feel really we're reaching the triggering point where humanity will trigger a major response, and it's already happening. Thank you very much for your
On all your behalves, I would like to thank Marco for a very, very interesting lecture. I'm sorry we missed the conclusion. Marco is an Italian, even though you are against mentioning nationalities and tribes. But you would not be a good Italian if you didn't have a romantic conclusion. So I want to begin by saying that I would sum up Dr. Lambertini's lecture by saying that although the situation is grave, he has a very positive message for us. He thinks that we are at a tipping point, and that the peoples of the world, the civic leaders, the corporate leaders, the mayors of cities, the leaders of national governments are beginning to come together to do something about the dire situation we are in. He also thinks that in the case of Asia, although we haven't been doing a good job in the last 30 years, but even on Asia, he's optimistic. Yeah? You're beginning to see in Asia, Asians doing things which, for example, is going down the green path. China, Japan are investing massively in renewable energy. And you see in the case of Indonesia, they're taking a new look at their potential for geothermal energy. So it's a positive message. Lin Heng, my boss for today, said we can go on for 30 minutes in a Q&A session. So I want to begin on a high point. Let me ask somebody who's an environmental economist, Professor Koh, whether he would do us a favor of asking the first challenging question.
Well, it's not really a favor, but...
Houston, can you ask Marco the first question. Can somebody bring a mic to Houston?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Lambertini. I found your talk informative, insightful, and there's very little I would disagree with a lot of things that you say here. Normally, one takes the economist and the environmental person as an antithesis, but actually, many people have the wrong perception. That's why I say economists are often misperceived and misaligned. Regarding Asia, I think my own writings and concern is that many of the Asian governments, while they want to also help the environment and do something for the environment, they're often very constrained. They're constrained because of their situation and their differential priorities, say between the poor Asian countries compared to the richer advanced countries, whose concern of the latter is more about the quality of life. And over in Asia, we have many are still fighting just to survive. So what is the responsibilities of the governments of Asia? Naturally, to provide jobs, income, security, employment in the first instance. And we hear that all the time. But there are many things which I think as an economist that we can actually persuade and ask governments to pay more attention to. That is, for example, we talked about externality issues, for example, right? So that's something that governments can really pay attention to and impose, say, for example, a simple carbon tax to get it going, that people do know about their responsibilities towards us, for example, their carbon emissions, right? We don't have to go all the way in the first instance dramatically, but we can certainly go a little at a time. So that's something that we can do. You talked about many things, but one of the things I think you look at Asia, you take away the fuel subsidies and all these things, right? You create havoc. There's unrest in Indonesia, Malaysia, and so on and so forth. And it's very hard to actually to take that away. And so that's a so-called endowment effect also in behavioral economics. So I think it's not easy, because ultimately people do care about costs and their usual environment, and they care about their income employment first. So externality is one thing, embracing all the green technology, the renewable energy, I think all is heading to the right direction. No country in the world, including China and Vietnam, whatever, that will just grow for growth's sake, to just worship the GNP. Because at the end of the day, they still need to live, they need to have clear waters, greenery, and so on, right? Good air. So if they're going to do all that and give up all these things, I think no government wants to do that. So I think not enough attention is paid, I think. I know you did, but there are a lot of writings which don't pay any credence or attention to what Asian governments are in fact doing and caring. But it takes time. It takes time, it takes money, and it takes generations. I guess I don't have a real question for you, a very dramatic question. But because I found all the things that you say is quite agreeable, right? So I beg to give to somebody else to ask a critical question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Marco, you want to react?
Yeah, I mean, just to say, of course, I totally agree, it's not easy. I would be more optimistic in terms of the timeline of potential change, because I think the change that has happened in the last 10 years in China, for example, in terms of their reorientation. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Not loud enough.
Okay. I think what you've seen, for example, in China in the last decade or so, has beaten any, in terms of acceleration and pace, any other country in the world, and has been really able to parallel strong human development and strong growth, of course with the high footprint, but also parallel that with a major investment in green directions. And of course, as I mentioned before, I think the real challenge here is develop and plan a transition that allow us to minimize destabilization, because this is really the key problem. And one of the major challenges we have, and I don't think nobody has come up with an idea, is actually jobs, is about jobs. How do we maintain social stability and jobs by moving from carbon to renewable? A complicated transition process and realignment of our systems that needs to be planned very carefully. And this is where government, of course, and businesses play a major role together.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Professor Simon Tay whether he could ask the next question. I'm sorry to put my friends in this position.
Thank you. I think I have a question rather than a comment. I enjoyed the lecture too. May I ask maybe two? I'm not sure the quality, so maybe there's good quantity. First, on the idea of the green economy, I agree with much of you said, but I still hesitate how different it is from the older idea of sustainable development. Obviously, it may have more appeal for economists and business people because of the word economy is there. But the concepts of bringing economic growth together with environmental concerns and social dimension were already the three pillars of sustainable development. So how different is this idea? The second, and much more specific, is we are now facing an issue which deals with, I think, the green economy. The air in Singapore is again past the 100 PSI mark, which marks not just the fires on the ground in Indonesia, but really a production and chain supply issue that implicates many industries, some of which you mentioned in the resource sector, palm oil and a couple of others. You know Indonesia very well in your previous work, and WWF is very much engaged with Indonesia. What counsel would you give to us or others in the region concerned about getting Indonesia to turn to the concept of green economy and focusing in on stopping the haze by turning production to a more sustainable basis?
Thank you very much. I think the first question is probably quite simple, because I think there is not an immense difference between sustainable development concept and green economy. I think green economy is something that resonates much stronger with a number of audiences, and that's the way it has evolved in its narrative. But I agree, I think the pillars are very much the same, and the overall strategy, it is very much the same. I think one dimension maybe that has changed is that the sustainable development concept was more centered around production and use of natural resources in a renewable way. Now the carbon footprint is taking a front stage in the debate. That's a new dimension with climate change aggravating over the last 20 years. The haze. Well, there are three dimensions to the haze, the issue, that are equally important and are all very interconnected. And where actually, I think, again, the two main players here, maybe including civil society to some extent, but particularly businesses and governments, have the key to resolve that. One is investment related and connected to good practices standards. So investment from Singapore into palm oil sector in Indonesia has to demand standards that you would expect in your country and that should be applied in any other country where they operate, first. Second dimension is businesses themselves. They should voluntarily apply those standards without waiting for government or investors to really put up regulatory systems. And thirdly, governance. So we do need to seriously support and or put pressure on governments that are not looking carefully at governance issues, particularly at the ground level. Because as we know, one of the main issues in terms of unsustainable use of resources and practices in business is related to weak and not focused governance, particularly at the local level. So these are the three dimensions, two of which really reside very much in your hands. As a business community in Singapore and government, and the other, of course, mainly in Indonesia. So I wish I had the silver bullet, but I think these are the three main focus areas.
Okay, thank you very much, Marco. Simon, you happy with that answer? Yes. I see a hand here. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Sun Xi. I'm socially responsible investment analyst and commentary writer. I'm from China. China is the largest developing country, but clearly we don't like pollution. We want to become a great power like USA. However, in reality, USA is the only country which rejects to sign the Kyoto protocols. We want to become a garden country like Singapore. However, in reality, Singapore has a quite high carbon footprint per capita. We want to learn carbon emission trading scheme from Australia. However, unfortunately, Australia just decided to abandon such scheme. So now we are starting to doubt whether green economy is just a good concept. Is it really feasible for developing countries such as China?
So I guess your question to Marco is, what is the role model for China?
Yeah.
Since United States,
Yeah.
Singapore, Australia are not role model.
What's
May I answer the question?
Yes, please, yes.
I would,
Very happy.
I would say look to Germany as a role model. Why do I say Germany? Germany derives more than 50% of its energy from solar. Germany today generates 5 times as much energy from solar than the United States. Most people think there's a trade-off, a trade-off between economic competitiveness on the one hand and being green on the other. But the Germans have shown to the world that it is possible to be green and to be competitive. Germany has one of the world's most competitive economies. It is, after China, the second largest exporter in the world, So if you ask me, is there a role model for China? I would say, look to Germany as a role model. And Germany, actually Singapore should look to Germany as a model. Because Germany has much less sunshine than Singapore. And Germany has shown that solar power is commercially viable and competitive. So, Marco, you want to add to that?
I think you did a great job. I just want to say that I really, I hope that through my presentation it came clear that I really commend the pace and the bravery of the Chinese government in dealing with some serious issues connected to Europe's very fast growth. And on top of that, you may want to look at Germany as a role model, but I would love to see you actually putting pressure on the US, on the EU, on Australia, on Canada, because you are actually now leading the way compared to what these countries are thinking of doing. And the great opportunity to do that is next year, 2 critical appointments. The first one is the climate agreement in Paris. We cannot fail again, because if we fail again, instead of 500,000 people on the street, you're going to have 500 million people on the street. And we cannot afford that. We need Paris to work. We need a climate agreement which is ambitious and collective. The second one is the Sustainable Development Goals. This is a major investment tool that the world is coming around every number of years to decide how to support development in the planet to the least developed countries. And the Millennium Development Goals did magic for health and poverty alleviation, we know that. And we're talking about $1 trillion investment and more. Sustainable Development Goals next year, and they're called Sustainable Development Goals not by chance, they have the great opportunity to embed green economy concept, environment, into all the goals, from health to poverty alleviation to economy, because the environment is playing a role in all these dimensions. And right now, the targets and the draft goals are really reflecting that. So we're very excited. So if we can get a climate agreement in Paris and good integrated environmental development sustainable goals next year, I think that the triggering point become real.
Thank you. Another question, please? Yes.
Hi. I have a question about biodiversity. And
finally, great.
Okay, so I'm imagining you could probably eventually convince people that they should care about clean water and the climate and clean air because it affects them directly. You know, convince the average Singaporean on the street or a politician or a businessman. But how do you get them to care about some random species of moth off in Borneo, or a fungus, or a random rat or something? And what's to prevent us having a world where we solve all these problems in 100 years, but we have these simplified landscapes when we've lost a lot of the biodiversity? I think, to me, they could be decoupled. So what's to encourage people to care about biodiversity specifically?
Thank you, and I hope you got a clear message also about the fact that we need to concentrate on biodiversity because it's the foundation of all ecosystem productivity. So that's very clear to us as a very top priority. I think tactically, we're talking about tactics here and social marketing almost. WWF has been always using iconic species to use them as proxies for the broader biodiversity. It's quite tough to get people excited for a moth in the middle of Borneo that doesn't even have a name. I am very excited, but I'm a bit of a rare breed. But I think using iconic species, that helps. Species that are keystone species that actually help then protect broader biodiversity. And the other dimension is to focus on ecosystems. So tropical forests, coral reefs, this is the way that from a communication perspective is beginning to resonate very strongly with the public and is beginning to really trigger a response that a single individual obscure species cannot really do. So tactically, I think these two are powerful approaches.
So I guess the WWF strategy is to use charismatic species of animal to convey the message. Huh?
Yes, and we have a panda instead of a moth in the logo for that reason. Yeah.
You made a reference to coral reefs. Huh? One of the world's leading authorities on coral reefs is here. I don't know whether Professor Cho Long, you want to ask a question? Or?
This is a payback for something. This is a revenge moment.
Yes, especially in the last 5 years, there's this movement looking into the blue economy, and many countries in East Asia are really embracing it. But when I look at the concept of what they think blue economy is, somehow it is very different from our concept of green economy. And they're looking at blue economy as something that there's another big environmental dimension out there ready for exploitation. And I think somehow if we're looking at biodiversity, the marine resources, especially in the face of blue economy, because blue economy just does not embrace sustainability at all. And that, I think, is going to be a very big challenge.
Just to say, you will be pleased to know that we are preparing a Blue Living Planet report. So it will be a Living Planet report focused entirely on the oceans.
On the ocean.
Yes.
Blue Living Planet.
Yes.
Very good. Another question from the audience. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Jason from National Parks Board. I'd just like to ask you, most of the developed economies, during their industrialization stage, they do make use a lot of cheap fossil fuel like coal. So will it be a bit unfair to judge developing countries today in their use of coal as a source of fuel? And another question is, can you propose an alternate source of renewable energy that's as efficient, or rather that's as easily transportable and reliable as our fossil fuel?
Thank you. So absolutely, it is totally unfair to criticize, but it's critical what happens and why coal is so cheap and why oil is cheap compared to many other sources today. It's because it's highly subsidized. Highly subsidized. There are subsidies going into fossil fuel all over the place. There are government regulations that are protecting these businesses because until now there's been the fuel of development, and until now they've been source of employment. We need to change the paradigm. So it's not a question of criticizing, it's a question of really changing the focus. In terms of what renewables could actually happen, could actually make the difference, it all depends on country by country. But of course we're talking about the most developed one right now is wind and solar, with a greater potential, clearly. But there are new ideas, new technology coming up, and who knows, there could be some really revolutionary new finding on a number of other renewable opportunities. One dimension which is very exciting, again, in order to reconnect connect human development and green economy is, we were talking actually today at the table about that, is, for example, the plan of ADB of dispersing micro renewable energy sources in rural areas in developing countries. This is powerful, and this is also reaching, as I said before, the important connection between quality of life, development quality of life, and decarbonization of the society. So plans like this are possible, are happening already to some extent. They could be scaled up, and that will make a major contribution in a number of countries that are beginning to develop, and to give them the opportunity to develop in a different way.
Can I pursue you on this? Because I think the question he asked is a very important question, and I often hear this from my Indian colleagues. Coal is the cheapest source of energy because coal is plentiful and relatively accessible. My Indian friends will say, you, the advanced countries, had in the earlier phase of your economic development done a lot of harm to the environment. But as a result of which you now achieved the status you are in of a developed, advanced economy. This is India's historic opportunity to catch up with the West. And why are you preventing us, India, from doing so? Why are you imposing on us standards which you never observed at a similar stage in your economic development, that it is not fair? How do you respond to the Indian?
So the response, I think, is actually quite simple, because it's not a question of preventing the development. The question is to actually supporting a different type of development. And that's where I'm so obsessed about really redesigning completely the investment and subsidies system that at the moment is going to continue to support India in developing onto a carbonized economy. And that has got to change, because there are alternatives. China is demonstrating that there are alternatives. China started in the business as usual kind of Western type of development, disastrous with high ecological footprint, high carbon footprint. And now, because of their size, because of their pace, they're facing already what everybody will face in the future, a tipping point.
But China is still building
It's still building.
Coal-fired plants.
Sure, but it's transitioning. And we're talking about 15 years, 20 years, right? So it's really a tiny time horizon, and I think the trend is very clear. China is going to invest from now on in renewables, is already doing it, and China in the next 20 years is going to see a major transformation of their power generation capability.
But you admitted yourself earlier in your lecture that the transition from the existing economic model to a low-carbon economy will be a difficult one, right? It is difficult for developed countries. It's even more difficult for China and India. And China is more advanced than India. So if you put yourselves in the shoes of the Indian, what are your options?
Well, yes, I mean, if I had the answer, I would be the Prime Minister of India. But which I'm not sure is the job I want. But I think, I think, in fact, maybe I would challenge that view, because if you are not yet developed, that's the opportunity to develop in a different way. And the transition will be easier. The transition will be much more complicated in economies which are already embraced the carbon dependency. Economies that are less dependent on carbon because they are at the early stage of development. I think the transition could potentially be easier if the whole world supports that direction. And I'm talking about the financial markets and the investment tools that we have available.
India will turn to you and say, Marco, I'm willing to not build coal-powered plants if you help me, if you subsidize.
That's right.
If you subsidize my renewable energy. Who's going to subsidize India's renewable energy? The
same people that at the moment are subsidizing carbon-based economy, or the main financial instruments that the world has at its disposal. And so we have to redirect that financial flow completely, gradually, but completely towards renewables. But I think this is the question, Tommy. This really is the question. How we can transition in a way that people in developing economies are not paying the price, which is an unjust price, that other countries haven't paid in the past.
It's not the moderator's job to argue.
But it is exciting.
I'm glad my wife's not here, or she'll scold me tonight. So, question from you, please. Member of the audience. George Ofori, Professor Ofori.
Well, I like the lecture very much, especially the part about the tribe, because I come from a continent where the tribe is really understood.
We all have tribes, all have tribes.
Yes. But I was going to ask you, how do we move from all these many, many tribes? I mean, even here we've heard about China, India, the US, developing countries, and so on. I'm going to ask the moderator and the speaker, how do we move from the many, many tribes to the one tribe that the speaker proposed?
Oh. Invite everybody at dinner and then we become all friends. I think we already are, I mean, this is off the top of my mind, yeah? And this is not a WF official position, by the way. But it's an exciting question, and it really goes deep into how humans are able to overcome their biological constraints, which are genetic. They are the way we evolved. And I think we've seen economy becoming already globalized. We are not there socially globalized. And that's really the challenge. But I really believe, I mean, I'm looking at young generations. I'm actually talking a lot to teenagers. I love speaking to young people. And my son is 13, so he's already a teenager, big way. You can sense from a young generation there is already a collective view of the world, which is so different from our generation. Nationality is not an issue anymore. It's not a label. You can talk to people on the other side of the planet through Skype and so many other WeChat and WhatsApp and all this stuff, Facebook. And so that really is going to completely revolutionize the social relationship of human race. In many different ways, some quite dark and complicated, like family stabilities, but because the family concept is challenged by that. But on the other hand, it's going to connect dramatically, and that's what I think we need. We need, after an economic globalization, we need really social globalization, and that will help. How fast? I think quite fast, because it's happening already, and the digital space is getting so sophisticated. So that also gives me some interesting.
I think I must argue with Marco.
He doesn't like Facebook.
But the reality is that we still live in a world of nation states.
Sure.
The reality is that there is a disconnect actually between the way in which the world is organized politically, which is into sovereign states, and the fact that we have a global economy, we live in one planet, we are so interconnected by the internet and other ways. There is a deficit of global governance.
Sure.
And even when you produce a national leader like President Obama, who is globally minded, he cannot carry his own legislature with him. The United States Congress does not support him, So, and of course there are many other national leaders that are not globally minded, because they feel they are elected by their own people, they're not elected by the world. Prime Minister Modi has to deliver for the Indian people. So to him, creating jobs for the Indian, creating a manufacturing sector, bringing India's growth rate to 7+%, these are his domestic imperatives. If he doesn't achieve these imperatives, he wouldn't win the next election, So there is a disconnect, I think, between the globalization of the world and the way in which we are organized politically. And I just don't see any simple solution.
No, of course there isn't. And I mentioned this myself in the presentation. I totally agree. We are not definitely arguing on this. But I also believe in the power of people and mobilization. And we've seen that. What happens in North Africa, in the Arab world a couple of years ago was dramatic. And I think if we can create a global movement, and it will happen, it will become to happen, then governments will begin to think in a different way, I hope. And
Marco, in your lecture, you referred to Singapore, and you you posed 2 challenges to us Singaporeans. Huh? Could you elaborate on these 2 challenges? You said 2 challenges. One is to
Consumption.
for Singapore to make a contribution to the changing the existing paradigm of production and consumption. And you are too oriental, not clear. Could you be more occidental and be clearer? What do you have in mind? And secondly, you said that we are a major financial hub, and it would be a good thing if our financial services industry were to embrace sustainable development in their loan policy. Well, Elaine will tell you that it's not so easy. I've written to the Singapore Bank, just an example, to encourage them all to join the RSPO, the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. Because a lot of the financing for palm oil plantation come from here. So if I can encourage the financial institutions in Singapore to be green, in their loan policy, then as you say, half the battle is won. But I've so far not been very successful. So Marco, please elaborate. What are your challenges for Singapore?
So first of all, I mean, it is not easy, and we know that. But nevertheless, I think, and that's why you frame it right, these are challenges, not just for Singapore, for many other countries, but we're in Singapore, and I think particularly for Singapore, really getting their businesses and the businesses that operates outside, and we made the example of the haze, to apply strong standards with high sustainability and environmental safeguards embedded in it. And equally developing and maybe piloting some investment models which are equally embedding strong environmental safeguards in it. And as a consequence, also bringing together the people of Singapore to support those investments and those new different investments and those new different models of production so that even consumption becomes more sustainable. That's how you square the circle. Easy to say, difficult to do. But I think, I believe in small steps and avalanche effects, and I think it would be great to find a bank, or maybe to begin to have a fraction of the Temasek investment to begin to work in that way, and show that it's possible, and actually it's not detrimental to profit and revenues.
We have many students in the room. I'd like to ask the students to ask some questions. Yes, please. Hi, Esther, right?
Yes.
Esther.
Hi, I'm not a student. I just want to share from the business perspective. Thanks very much, Dr. Lambertini, for the very enlightening lecture. I'm representing City Developments Limited, and we are probably the greenest developer. We started our green journey since 1995, before nobody really talked about climate change at that time, about 20 years ago. The journey was very lonely then. In recent years, there have been stronger pickup, more higher awareness of climate change and environmental issues. But I would say that the journey is still very lonely. And we would like to have more partners, especially investors and consumers, most importantly. Just now you mentioned about the balance between production and consumption, and which I have been actually talking about it for many years, because we have very low level of green consumerism in Singapore. Not many buyers, purchasers are asking for green buildings like what we build, or green space. Therefore, and in fact, nobody will really pay a premium for green buildings or green homes and all that, because these are big ticket items. And I think most important thing is the consumer's mindset. Maybe it's also because of our clean and green environment that a lot of people don't feel that, climate change, we talk about it, but I don't feel the threat until they see the haze last year. So I think it will be good that if we change the mindset of consumers, production will come. If consumers are demanding for green product, whether it's small ticket item or big ticket item like a home, there will be more developer, more manufacturer will produce green products. So this is one thing. And Prof, I also agree with you. I have been talking to bankers as well to provide a little bit of incentive for home mortgage, not to lower the mortgage rate because our mortgage rate is already very low. Just dangle a little bit of, say, something like, furnishing, a loan or whatever at a more privileged rate. Yeah, that will actually encourage green consumerism, to go a little bit more. And only with there's demand, there will be supply, and there will be, more green products, in the country. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. But what it really means is that there's a lot of work for Elaine to do in Singapore. She has to educate Singapore consumers so that they will pay a premium to buy green building from Esther. But Esther has been very modest. Actually, CDL is a very successful, very profitable company.
And that's great.
So the journey has not been lonely, because she's been very successful.
That's good, and I commend your commitment. And I think, but you're right. I think he's a chicken and egg. Is production and consumption really intertwined? But I think his role of civil society, WWF, Nature Society, other organizations in Singapore to really help convince, build the consumer movement that supports that direction. And we're doing this. We're happy to do more.
The lady there, please.
I'm a lifelong student. I just went to Copenhagen to learn about the Nordic model. It was basically very substantial, but being an architect planner, urban designer, and a landscape architect, I felt that we should educate the young, because I think we are all able to do things that, like what you recommend, the finance part, and the marine. And I'm very glad to know that students from the MEM is looking at marine, because I was also told in Copenhagen about the water. Should Earth be called water instead of Earth? But nevertheless, what I felt is that we should start from young, for the children to be educated to eat more vegetable instead of eating chicken and beef and pork. And I think it may be mundane, but educating the young how to cycle is more important than taking them to school by car. So I felt that I would like to reverse by going back to help the young generation, getting to our government, which has done a lot for us, and able to help out where we can. Because we are already at the level that we can help others. So I feel that this is where perhaps the wildlife, like in our green movement in M parks, the green mark, where we bring in diversity of butterflies and insects, but we do not know enough about insects, so we need to learn more about insects. And I would say that the government has done a lot for us, and now it's our turn to do back for the nation, for the community. Perhaps you could tell us more about how to educate our younger generation, because we are the one who have contaminated. Now we have to ask them how to recycle, stop wastage, and develop them for the future.
Thank you very much. Yes, not much to add. This is a critical component of the work we do already, but I think in Singapore there is a huge movement of local NGOs that do their work, the WWF, but Nature Society and others do a lot of this. And I don't know what you think, but I've been visiting the country for more than 25 years intermittently, and I've seen a major growth in awareness. We need to do more, but I think it is happening. We need to just intensify the effort. That's critical, but I think I'm pretty positive about the direction.
It's almost 7 o'clock, so let me take all the remaining questions, and then I'll ask Marco to respond to all of you in a composite reply, and also to sum up the lecture. So I'll go to the back first, if you don't mind. There are 2 hands in the back. Could you please ask your questions? Then I'll come to Lin Hing. Yeah. Please, yes. Can you stand up, please?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm just building on the previous 2 comments about culture. I realized that a lot of mindsets the word mindset was mentioned multiple times, and it's something that needs to change, obviously. So how would you say we should change a culture of to turn it towards a green economy, apart from instilling draconian laws?
Okay. Thank you. Good question. How do you change the mindset? The one behind, yeah.
Hi, I'm a student. I'm 17. My name is Yifeng, and I volunteer with NParks regularly as a tour guide. So I found the lecture very interesting, and I found the Q&A session very interesting as well. And I learned like a lot of different information, and I saw a lot of different perspectives. So my question is, what do I do now? Like,
sorry, say again.
What do I do now?
What do I do? What do you do now?
What role do you think the youth can play in this very big arena?
What role can you play?
Yeah, very good.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, there's another hand here.
Hi, I agree with this lady in front here who says that we should educate the young, but are there systematic plans to educate the rich? The rich who are the ones who... The rich. A lot of the rich people miss the environmental education, right? A lot of the problems now are caused by the rich. Are there systematic plans to educate the rich? Thank you.
I think the rich feel they don't need to be educated. Prof Lai. Oh, sorry, that's one more student at the back. Could we hear from the student first? Yes,
actually, I'm not a student. I just graduated from NUS. I'm Aris, and I have a concern regarding...
Can you stand up so we can see?
I have a concern regarding educating the public, because I feel that members of the public, especially in Singapore, are so used to convenience, and that's a hurdle for them developing this biophilia for maybe donating to the charities that with cause for conservation, or maybe, for instance, for the new train line that's starting across the Central Reserves. I think there's a plan for this new train line, and it may cut through the reserves, but Singaporeans don't really, for this added convenience, it's going to cause, it may cause detriment to the current state of our forests in Singapore. So I feel like because of this, Singaporeans are so satisfied with their own lives. They don't really want to spare a thought about the state of the environmental degradation in the world. So how do you propose we reach this and let them get out of their comfort zone, because it's not comfortable for people.
Okay.
Anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Prof Lai, last question.
I just think that the focus really, in the end, is on education, right? From the children to the adults to the rich. But my question is also in relation to education. I think that our government servants need to be educated on the environment. Because, and here, when we talk, Marco, you mentioned that we need to remove the different states, you know, the nation states concept when countries negotiate. I also feel that the different sectors of the government need to work together and look at the challenges and the problems that lie before them. And why do I say this? I give it a specific example. Hybrid cars, for example. We are not, it's a failure in Singapore. Very few people buy hybrid cars. Why? Because the incentives are inadequate to make them attractive. The environmental economists will say, I'm sure they can work out the figures, that, you know, if the government were to subsidize hybrid cars and make them attractive, there will be more benefits to the environment. But
I would disagree with that. I think that hybrid car is not as successful in Singapore as in the United States, for example, not only because the tax incentive here is not as big as that in America, but because the public attitude towards the environment in Singapore is not as enlightened as that in America.
Exactly.
So it comes down.
Disagree with that.
Comes down to people's individual values, preferences.
Yes, but it is a fact that the tax incentives are not attractive. See, and the reason I'm linking this to government departments is that people always blame the NEA, but it's the Ministry of Finance that decides the tax incentives. So the question is, you know, do they understand there's a need to tweak the incentives? And this is just an example, but there are other ways I think that governments can play a role in influencing the consumption patterns of citizens. So my question therefore for Marco is, how do you see this implementable, for governments? Thank you.
But maybe Marco, if I may say something, huh? I think those of us in the environmental movement need to be more humble and modest. I think we shouldn't use the word educate, because it's too arrogant. I mean, you're putting yourself on a high position, and you're treating others as people in need of enlightenment. So I think don't use the word educate. When you talk about educating the government, there'll be pushback against you. People are not going to be receptive if you appear to be arrogant and self-righteous. So I think we need to be humble, modest, respectful, and persuasive. Marco, do you agree?
Totally. Now I'm going to become the chair. Next question.
Well,
why don't you keep going and answer all the questions? I mean, that's...
Are there any more questions? I think maybe time to conclude this. The last time Marco and I met, I gave him a copy of Professor Leotan's book, The Encyclopedia of Singapore Biodiversity. And I told him earlier today that if he did a good job today, I will give him another book. I think all of you will agree that he did a good job, right? So I'm going to give him a book on Sungai Buloh.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And I think last time Tommy gave me a book was about 5 kilos heavy. So I thought it was actually punishment, not... this time you can say he's really... Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone again for coming.
Just a minute, yeah, we have other presents.
That was the punishment. Oh dear.
Thank you so very much. We have a lot of presents for you, but first of all, this one is a Peranakan plate. Suitably engraved, so you remember this lecture. And as I told you in the car, who are the Peranakans, And so we know that you're traveling to Indonesia, so we might just send
beautiful.
So it's actually specially commissioned by...
I've got to be careful, this is probably... Here we go. Thank you very much. Thank you. Fantastic. There is even a bird on it. It is a bird, yes.
And you can see this specially commissioned by NUS, so there's
Thank you.
Sort of write-up on this. So this is
Thank you so much.
one person. The second one is actually...
thank you.
The second one is actually a whole lot of books, 5 books.
That's really major punishment. I shouldn't have said that.
This is to showcase all the books that the MEM program has produced.
I will religiously read all of this.
Well, we will not load up your luggage.
No.
We will have it sent.
Oh, that's gracious. But I have to say, actually, today the university gave me a fantastic introduction of their courses, and there was a list of dissertations. I don't know whether there's some authors here, but some were really intriguing and very close to our mission. So I'm actually not joking. I'm going to read these books, and I'm sure I'll find a lot of inspiration. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So this is phase 2. So we will put this back and send it to you. The third gift.
Another present.
Okay.
One. It's a book on the Malayan tiger. Just last week, there was a special feature on the very highly endangered Malayan tiger. Apparently, there are 3,500 tigers left worldwide, and only about 300 or less than that in the Malayan jungles. And this is a book to focus on the tiger, and we need to know, perhaps I should have asked this question, how WWF is going to help the tiger conservation.
So we have a program called Tigers Alive, and the target is double the number of tigers by, Hélène, 2020. So watch that space.
I'll ask you for further and better particulars.
Thank you very much.
So this is the gift. And then, okay.
Thank you.
Yes, and I also have the same book for Professor Tommy Koh. Yes, thank you.
Oh, great.
Thank you. I would like to thank also our sponsors with some books. So, the Heinrich Jessen, please.
That's the one, that's the one.
And also the book on tigers, it's also for you. And actually, we would also like to give you the whole set of that. So we will send that to your office. Thanks again so very much.
Thank you very much, thank you. So if anybody is short of bedtime readings, come and see Eric and I. We've got something to show you.
So thanks again.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
The co-hosts,
thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I think we all agree that it has been a very fruitful evening, and we've learned a lot, and we have to keep on thinking how to address these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much again.
I need to also invite all of you now to a reception that's just outside. It's a good time to relax, have something to eat, and network. Okay? So do enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you very much. And let's, just a minute, wait for the next Asia Environment Lecture, which will be around about the same time next year. And please take our brochures, etc. We welcome new students in our MEM and the Bachelor's in Environmental Studies programs. And of course, if you have money or you know people with money to donate, please let us know. We need scholarships. Thank you. Good night.